Hey folks, welcome to week 5 of GID 109, Intro to Web Design. How is everybody? Hope you all doing well, keeping busy. Alright, so let's jump into the 5th week of this semester, which puts us at the end of the first third of the semester. We're almost 30% of the way through the class. Alright, so let's take a look at modules, and we'll go down to Module 5. Now, last week in Week 4, you guys were introduced to our first web design project. So prior to that, of course, we went over the whole workflow about how we are going to work on our two major web design projects. And of course, you are already well into your historical speculative paper and digital poster that you're making based on the history of the web. So we have a couple of things due this week, and we're going to get into a bit of a new topic that's directly related to our first project. So let's take a look at the Week 5 overview. Okay, so our main goal this week, which we'll get to toward the end here, is we're going to review and discuss the anatomy of a website, the basic components that make up a common website, and things to sort of be aware of. If we were working on publication design or print design, we would be talking about sort of the anatomy of a basic publication design. But since we're doing web design, we'll be talking about the anatomy of a website. Understanding the structure and components that are common to the things we are designing is really important, because as you're making your design decisions, you want to be aware of these sort of areas of anatomy, as it were, and sort of they help inform the decisions you're going to make, particularly since our first project is to redesign an existing website, and so we want to make sure that we're keeping it up to date, as it were. Okay, so that's the main thing. Now, you do have some reading today, or I should say a consumable here under media. This website here, this article, 5 excellent website redesigns. Now, this is a very relevant article from Just in Mind. This falls under the category of UX design, research and insights. So since we are, of course, redesigning an existing website, and by now you guys should have identified a website that you can redesign and worked on your first couple of points from that, which you're going to submit through the Blackboard space that we have, it's probably a good idea to take a look at some examples of websites that have been redesigned. So, of course, web design redesign projects, are a ton of work, and people are often reluctant to do them because once you have a website in place, it's really difficult to build up the motivation and sort of break the inertia to go ahead and do a redesign. And, of course, in real life, it's a costly endeavor. But here are 5 examples of some really good redesign. So you're going to read through this article on your own and check out the various examples. Unfortunately, there is a few pop-up ads on this website, so just try to avoid those as best you can. So it goes through these 5 different redesigns, but what's great about this article is not only does it show you the redesigns and links you to the actual site, but it does a little before and after overview. So this is your reading for the week. This is your textbook reading, as it were. Make sure that you go through this. Okay, so that's your consumable under Medium. Now let's talk about what's due. The end of this week, on Friday, part 2 of your historical speculative paper is due. So let's take a look and see what that is, what exactly is part 2. So here we are in the historical speculative paper handout, which by now, of course, you have. So you already finished part 1, right? You decided which area of the web history that you want to focus on. You wrote your inquiry question, and you did some background research and collected a bunch of sources that you can use for your further research. Now, part 2 is really where we get into that further research. So of the locations that you used for your background research, now you're going to kind of narrow it down, or maybe expand it, depends on how many you started with, into sources that you're going to really use for your research, right? Because now that you've nailed down your inquiry question, you should really know where you need to be doing your research, right? So your deliverable for part 2 is you're going to create an annotated bibliography of a minimum of 5 sources. 2 of them have to be academic in nature, and the other 3 can be outside of academia. So, of course, they are due this week at the end of the week. Check the due dates in Blackboard. Now, for more details on what part 2 is, of course, scroll down to the part 2 section of the handout, secondary source research. This goes over exactly what you're doing. You're creating an annotated bibliography, which corresponds with your inquiry question. Of course, an annotated bibliography, if you're not familiar with it, really simple, is just a list of your references. Each of your references is entered into your notes in your Microsoft Word document or your Google Docs document or your Apple Pages, whatever you're using for your desktop publishing. And of course, they all have to be relevant to your inquiry question, and you have to use either MLA, APA, or Chicago style when listing your sources. I personally do not care which style you use. Pick a style and stick with it. If Mount Wachusett has a specific style that they prefer you use, then go ahead and use that, but it doesn't matter to me one way or the other. Just make sure that you're using one of these citation styles. Now, if you're unsure of how to create your citations for your sources, don't just list them. You can't just put the web addresses, the domain names, or the book names, or whatever. You have to actually use citations. Now, there's two great websites that sort of help you build citations if you don't know how to write them yourself. The first one is AutoBib. Let's take a look at that one. Now, AutoBib focuses solely on books. So if one of the sources you're using has an ISBN number, right, which is that code number that identifies all printed publications, books mostly, you can punch in the ISBN number here, and you can choose your citation style, MLA, APA, Chicago, and so on and so forth. And then it will go ahead and find it. So, for example, if we were in, say, Amazon, let's just go to Amazon quickly here, and if we were to take a look at a book on, let's say, Tim Berners-Lee, the guy that invented the World Wide Web, right? And so let's say we grab this book right here, which is a book that he actually wrote called Weaving the Web. And so let's say you read this book, or you read part of this book as part of your research for this assignment. Well, you can grab the ISBN number, which is right here, right? Either the ISBN 10 or the ISBN 13, it doesn't matter. And you can paste it right here into AutoBib. And let's say we're going to go with the MLA citation style. Simply hit get, and it goes ahead and gives it to you. So it's literally done for you. And then all you have to do is copy and paste this entire citation. Just highlight it, copy it, and then drop it into your running Word document. So once you've gone ahead and done that, of course, now you have that citation. Now the other way in which you can create citations is through Citation Machine, another great website that works kind of exactly the same as AutoBib. I will warn you that Citation Machine is pretty heavy with advertising, so look out for all the pop-up ads, but unfortunately that's how they make money, so you got to work through it. So you can click Create Citations. Now what's different about Citation Machine from AutoBib is that it will create citations not just for books, but also for websites, journals, and lots of other things, newspapers, films, videos, directly from the Bible, brochures, cartoons, you name it. So it creates citations, still using the various different styles, any way you want. So if you were using a website, you can just simply go to website, punch in the URL, and it'll go ahead and make the citation for you. Sometimes you have to type in some of the information yourself, so make sure you have the website handy. But for the most part, Citation Machine does a good job making the citations for you. Okay, so use one of these two sources to make your citations, right? List them out in your document, right? And then, of course, each reference or source that you're using has to be annotated, right? So it's one bibliographical entry for each one. You're going to state the bibliographic sentence, which is just another phrase for the citation, right? And you're going to provide these three pieces of data. So this is where your annotations come in. So because presumably you have read all of these sources as your research. So you are basically going to essentially put down information that you learned from those sources. Anything you observed from reading it, any facts that you found interesting, any statistics that are going to be useful to your paper, any assertions that it makes that you find interesting or useful, and of course, any quotes that you want to use. So put those in, and those are your annotations. Annotations are just like notes, right? You're just putting in notes about the sources that you're using, okay? So put those underneath each of the citation sentences, the bibliographic sentences. And then you're just going to provide a minimum of 2 sentences that just sort of talks about how useful you found that particular source. That's it. Pretty simple. All in your own words. Nothing really complicated. So just locate your stuff. So remember, it's 5 sources. 2 of them have to be academic in nature. and then the other 3 can be from literally anywhere. Now, academic, of course, is from like a journal or a published book or something like that, okay? Be sure to number each source, right? You have 5 of them, so number them 1 through 5. And of course, you can read through the rest of the instructions here. Pretty straightforward. If you're unclear about how to identify an academic source, there is an article right here, How to Identify an Academic Source. So that's pretty straightforward. And of course, how do you check your sources for credibility? If you're unsure if it's a reliable, credible source, you can read this article here from EasyBib, which goes into how to double check to see if it's a reliable source. So, you might already know how to do those things from other classes, but if you're unsure, check these out, okay? All right. So again, the thing you're going to actually turn in is that Word document. Make sure you restate your inquiry question at the top, not because we don't know it already. You've already turned it in, but it's nice to have it at the top all the time, just so that we're clear what we're talking about here. And then go ahead and list out your 5 sources, put in the bibliographic sentence, and make sure you do your annotations. Okay, so that's the first thing that's due at the end of this week. Okay, it shouldn't take you too long to do because you already have your sources from your initial research. Now you're just sort of narrowing them down and putting in some annotations. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, the other thing that's due at the end of the week is part 1, deliverable number 1 from project 1. I know, deliverable 1, project 1, there's a lot of numbering going on, but it's project 1, deliverable 1. So what does that look like? Well, again, let's go back to the handout. So this here, of course, is project 1. You guys know what you're doing here. The prep steps we have already completed last week, right? Research your chosen company, review their current website, list and annotate all of their site shortcomings. You did that last week on the discussion board. So that is all set. So now we're moving into the website project workflow that we have, right? So your first deliverable, again, here's our workflow. You remember this? We went over this a couple weeks ago. It's our UX design workflow, our web design workflow. So remember, deliverable 1. So this is what's due at the end of this week. Your written responses to steps 1 through 3 and your sketches from step 4. Let's find out what those are again, just so we're clear. So basically, you are going to turn in everything from here to here, and that is your deliverable 1. So steps 2, 3, 4, and 5, those are all getting turned in, right? So basically we have your needs assessment, right? And again, you can do all of this in a Word document, nothing fancy. Just open up a Word document and start putting your stuff together, right? So your needs assessment, any of your research sources, right? Where have you done your research? Answer these questions. Your brainstorming, right? And these can be doodles or sketches or mind maps or dumping clumps or anything you've done for brainstorming. Just write up some ideas about that and you'll be good. However you want to do it. Now, we did have that ideation handout a couple weeks ago, so maybe you want to use one of those techniques, or maybe you have your own way to do it. You could simply say, my ideation technique for this project was I went for a bike ride and laid under a tree for 20 minutes, and then I came up with these ideas, and then here are my ideas. So whatever technique you use to sort of come up with some good ideas is fine with me. They can be formal ideation techniques like we introduced, or they can be just stuff you do for yourself, right? And then lastly, of course, you're going to turn in some sketches. These are going to be done on paper. So you're going to do them on paper or in your notebook. You're going to photograph them and then include those photos in your Word document, right, for this first deliverable. Keep them loose and fast. These are just rough sketches. You're just sketching out ideas for the layout of your website redesign. That's it. Pretty straightforward. There should only be 2 to 4 pages in your Word document, nothing major, okay? So that is your first deliverable. Now, I say nothing major, but make sure you put a lot of thought into these, right? When I say it's nothing major, I mean there's not a lot to turn in, but put some time and effort into these. Put a lot of thought into it. By now, you've thought about the first project. You've answered those first couple of questions. Really try to answer these additional questions with as much thought as you can, okay? Do a bunch of research, things that you think are relevant. Now, you don't need academic sources for this type of research. This is just research that helps answer these questions, right? What is your client all about? What is your client's goals? What do they do best? Who is their intended audience? Take a look at at similar organizations. Who is their competition? Get to know the industry. Just background research on your client, on the website that you're trying to redesign and what they're all about. Don't just research their actual website, research their business. What do they do? Do they have another type of web presence? Are they on social media? Go check out their social media sources. What does that look like? Get to know as much about them as you can. Okay, that's the research. Then, of course, ideation, like we said, is brainstorming. Try to come up with some ideas about how you want to change their website. Now, the ideation process, you're doing this in words, right? So you have to be able to articulate your ideas. And then, of course, sketches are sketches. By now, you're probably pretty good at sketches, so be sure to work on those for sure. Okay, so that's what you're turning in at the end of this week. Deliverable 1 from Project 1 and Part 2 of your paper, okay? All right, so hopefully that's all clear. That's what's due this week. Now, let's move on to the main event this week, which we are going to go over the anatomy of a website, which is this link right here. This is a handout you can download, or you can view it directly here through Blackboard, either way. So we're going to hop over to that handout right now. Anatomy of a website. Now, the reason we want to go over this is because before we go redesigning a website, we should really understand the components that make up common websites today. Now, of course, all of these components are not available on every single website, but they're common. You see them a lot, okay? And it's not just about the mechanics of the website, it's also about the user experience and how people commonly view and interact with websites, right? So whether it's a desktop-only website, a responsive website, or a mobile site, there are certain considerations to make before you even pick up a mouse and get rolling on the design process, right? We're going to work on paper for a while here. That's why we're doing sketches. That's why we're doing wireframes. And so these components, these common anatomical pieces of a website, you're going to incorporate them into your sketches. You should be aware of them and make sure that you're using them in your ideas, okay? So these are sort of common pieces, parts, pieces that are germane to most sites that you should really be familiar with. Okay, designing a web page that pulls off the near magical feat of combining an aesthetically beautiful site and the punch of your message takes a good mix of art and science, right? The secret lies in giving yourself a little creative freedom while sticking to a good structure. So unlike, say, fine art or oil painting or even photography to a degree, web design, of course, is a combination of artistic influence and visual freedom and good, solid structure, right? And that's really the best way to design these things because they have to function and work a certain way, but you also want them to look really engaging and interesting. So it's a good combination. So it helps to know how they're built. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the common elements, right? So the first thing we're going to do is make sure you take time to think through your user's journey. Remember, as we defined last time, users are humans, right? It's a very cold word, user experience, as if users are robots. But really, those of us who visit websites, whether they be desktop, mobile, or applications, we're humans, right? And so you've got to go through the journey. So doing your research and thinking about the web page structure before you even start sketching on paper is really of paramount importance. As you do your research, make sure that you're focusing relentlessly on who your potential customers are and what their expectations in visiting the website might be. After all, designing a website that provides an excellent user experience is pretty impossible unless you really know who your users are. Who are the humans that are likely to visit the website? This is why I told you to do a lot of research on your client, what their business is all about, what their organization is all about, and who their customers are, who the people are that visit their website. The more you get to know them from sort of a sociological point of view, the better decisions you'll make in designing or redesigning the website, okay? So think through the user's journey. Put yourself in their shoes, as it were. Okay, next, let's talk about information architecture, okay? So information architecture is all about organizing the information on the website in a way that's clear, intuitive, and sensible. Now, in your journey to sort of find poorly designed websites that you need to redesign, you're probably going to find some that have a ton of good information on there, but it's just poorly structured. There's too much of it. There's too much to read. There's too much text. The organization of it doesn't make any sense. Either way, this is where information architecture comes in, right? So think about your own experience when you browse the web, right? So when you first land on a web page and you've never been there before, if it's poorly planned and it doesn't prove how relevant it is to you in a matter of seconds, that's frustrating, right? You land on a website and you're like, I don't know what this is all about. Doesn't make any sense. I don't know where to go. And what happens? I'm out of here, right? You just move on and go do something else. The amount of time that people spend on a website when they visit it for the first time is very brief. It is seconds. There have been studies that show that people spend less than 30 seconds on a web page, and if they do not feel connected to it, both from a visual connection and from an information architecture point of view, if they can't find the stuff they're looking for almost immediately, they're history. They leave. And so it's really important to think about, how am I going to organize my information? And that can be written information, photographic information, graphical information. It doesn't matter what. Okay? Good information architecture will create a hierarchy that emphasizes the most important elements and keeps visitors engaged. Without a really good skeleton to build your website on, you're really setting yourself up for failure. So take a look at the information that's on the website that you're going to redesign and really try to break it down into pieces and that makes sense. You don't have to put things on the same pages in the same way that they do in the original website. This is your opportunity to change that and make it better. Okay. Next, let's look at the navigation. Now, this is probably, it's listed here as the second most important part of the website, but honestly, you could argue this might be the most important part of the website. Because if the information you want is on the home page and people feel comfortable and at home, they're going to stick around, but where's the first place they're going to go? They're going to look for the navigation menu. How do I get around the website? How do I navigate the website? So it's one of the key aspects of information architecture that you should really consider really early, right? Is it going to be a horizontal bar that runs along the top? Is it going to be a vertical bar that runs down the side? Is it going to be a different type of navigation? How is the typography going to be presented? What are the font choices? Is it all uppercase? Is it all lowercase? Is it up and down case? Are we going to be using icons or pictograms? What's the color palette going to look like? So many decisions to make. And the goal is that you want to make it as simple as possible, as clear as possible, and it has to be consistent across the entire website. Nobody wants to get lost on a website. So the navigation really unto itself is like a little important design project, even before you get to the rest of the site. Because no matter how gorgeous the website looks, it can be the most beautiful website ever designed. If the navigation is complicated or difficult to find or confusing, you're going to lose people. So put a lot of time into that, right? Okay, your goal, of course, should be to make the simplest, most easy-to-use navigation possible. You achieve that with clear, concise, and useful language. Don't put more words than you need. You don't need sentences in your navigation. You just need words that say what it's going to do. Also, try to resist the urge to use navigation destinations that we've heard all over and over and over again, right? Home, about us. These are things that we've heard a million times. Maybe there's other short phrases you can use that get people to the same information in a more interesting way. So instead of making an About Us link, maybe you make an Our Story link. And maybe that's something that gets people to that point in a very clear and concise way, but you're not reusing the same language we hear all over and over again. Okay, next. Get the visual hierarchy right? We just talked about this a little earlier, but it's really important to understand what is the most important thing you want people to see when they land on your website? What is the next most important thing? And so on and so forth. You need a numbered list. And then once you understand the importance, the hierarchy, then you'll know how big to make things, how bright to make things, how bold, what colors to use. Now, visual hierarchy is a general concept you should be familiar with because, of course, this is the basis of good graphic design in general. It doesn't have to be on a website. This works in print design too, obviously. Same thing with our next thing. Use a grid. Make sure that you are using a grid system that makes sense. Now, of course, the grids we use in web design are a little different than the grids we use in print design. In print, we tend to use column grids, either the manuscript grid or a 2-column or a 3-column or a 4-column grid. In web design, we tend to use modular grids, or we tend to use hierarchical grids more often, but regardless, you're still using a grid. So you have to have that invisible structure underneath your design. Decide what type of grid's going to work best for you, right? Just like you would with a print project. Okay, pay attention to natural scanning patterns. Now, this again is something you probably learned in print design classes, but for the most part, when people are shown a designed object, whether it be a website, a poster, a flyer, a billboard, I don't care what it is, something that is a piece of graphic design, in a fraction of a second when they first look at it, their eyeball will scan that item in one of two ways. Either using a Z-shaped pattern, right, which goes from the upper left corner all the way down to the lower right corner in the shape of a Z. Or if they don't find the information they're looking for that way, they will use what's called a bullseye pattern. They will look at the center of the document and then radiate their view outward. And the reason for that, of course, is because that is how, in this part of the world at least, in the Western Hemisphere, this is how we are taught to read, right? Left to right, top to bottom. And things that are centered down the middle are also very attractive to people. Now, of course, the Z pattern would design itself differently if we were in a nation or an area where they read from right to left as opposed to left to right. But here we read left to right, and so it's that Z pattern, right? Other places it would be more of an S pattern, as it were. So pay attention to the natural scanning pattern, and that will help speak to how you set up your hierarchy. And again, this should be something you're familiar with because this is covered in print design as well, right? So here's a few ways. This is just some easy graphics to sort of give you an idea about how people read through. Here's some thumbnail ideas, right? Include the most important information on your website in the first 2 paragraphs. Keep it brief, right? Nobody needs pages and pages of stuff to read on the home page. Keep it brief. Use headings and subheadings. It works for publication design. It works for web design. Make sure you bold important words or use other types of emphasis. Group small amounts of related information together visually and use bulleted or numbered lists frequently. People like short little lists. It helps them get through the information in a way that's easy to understand, right? Try to do all the hard work up front and how you organize the information before we even start designing it. Now, if we look at Basecamp's website here, the red lines here indicate that Z pattern of how people read, right? The Basecamp logo's in the upper left corner. Their eyeball runs across the top. Oh, look, there's the uppermost navigation, right? That most important part of the website. And then they're going to go downwards, and here we get a little call out, and then we get some centered information, right? Notice there's not a lot of type. Look at the size of that hierarchy, right? The headline, "We've been expecting you," is ginormous. It's huge. And then the sub-headline is slightly smaller. Then they get to bulleted lists, right? Very cool bulleted list, but they're using check marks, but you get the idea. And then following that Z pattern, we get into the call to action, right? Which is sign up for our 30-day trial. It's asking the viewer to do something. And then boom, you're out. So following that Z pattern, you covered all the important elements of the home page. Logo, hey, I'm in the right place. Navigation, hey, I know how to get around. Call out, oh, that's interesting. Main information, oh, now I know what they're all about. Bullet points, hey, I've just learned some other information. Call to action, oh, sure, I'll give you my email address. I'll sign up for a 30-day free trial, and I'm out of here. Pretty great, right? Okay, next, let's keep going. All right, you're going to visually prioritize the key elements, right? This is just like hierarchy, same sort of idea. How do we create hierarchy? Well, the same way you do in print design, really. You can use these tools. Size, this is real simple, but things that are bigger get seen first. Pretty straightforward, right? If it's bigger, you see it first. So make sure you have nice big elements. They can be typographic, it can be graphic, it can be photographic, whatever you want. Either way, if it's important, make it big. All right, next, color. Use color. Now, if you look at this website here by Made, the majority of the website is black and white. There's very little color. But then this banner is this nice bright yellow color, so it stands out. So use color to provide emphasis. Next, layout, right? We just talked about the Z pattern, but generally speaking, good formatting encourages visitors to engage with the content throughout the page and find the most important information faster. Don't feel the need to jam a whole ton of information into an area. Now, this website here, the Think with Google website, you can see that it's broken down into a pretty obvious grid, right? We got 1 column, 2 column, 3 column, 4 column. So this is a 4-column modular grid, right? Because it has 4 columns and a variety of rows. It has 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, and so on and so forth. It's a scrolling site, so there's a number of rows. But notice that each of the areas that are created by the modular grid do not feel crowded, right? This top banner here is an entire row with 4 columns all the way across, and yet there's a ton of white space, a ton of negative space, so that the viewer's eye has a place to rest, right? You don't want to feel overly crowded with information. Notice the scale of the font, right? Nice big hierarchy, big headline, sub-headline, call to action button, simple subscribe button in blue, easy to find, and so on and so forth. Nice and easy, not overcrowded. People don't want to feel overwhelmed with information. So we talked a little bit about not overcrowding your space. Make sure you use a lot of white space or negative space. Now that doesn't mean that the empty space has to be white per se. It could be a color. But really what it means is just empty space. Space that doesn't have a ton of things going on. Right? Apple, of course, is pretty well known for this with their simplistic design, but other people do it well too. Okay. Next, general style. When you're deciding on graphics you're going to use, illustrations you might use, photography you might use, number one, be consistent in your choices. Number two, make sure they all work together. And number three, create a style, right? Create a style that works really nicely. Check out these sort of cartoony, almost fashion design-like illustrations that are used on this website. That's a consistent style. Now, of course, in real life, we would probably hire an illustrator or hire a photographer or whatnot. Here in the school project, we don't really have the ability to do that. But you can use stock photography, you can use stock illustrations, you can create your own illustrations if you want, or even shoot your own photography. Either way, the point is that you have a variety of ways to get these things, but make sure that they work together, they're consistent, and they overall create a bit of a style. Okay, now some other stuff I'm going to kind of go through quickly because you should be familiar with this from your previous design classes, but of course you know the rule of thirds. I'm sure you've heard that in your other design classes. It's breaking up a space into 3 equidistant sections, both vertically and horizontally. So here's a graphic of the National Geographic website. Notice how it's broken up into 3 vertical rows and 3 horizontal columns, and then everything is designed around those, right? So you can analyze this on your own. You don't need me to do that, but notice how it's all broken up into 3s. Really nice way to use a simple grid pattern, right? Let's talk about call to action buttons, right? Buttons, of course, can be simple. They don't have to be fancy. They don't need to look three-dimensional, but they definitely ask the viewer to do something, right? Learn more, sign up. That's it. Real simple phrasing, but it gets people to go do the next thing. You know, this website for Visage is very photographic. It's this big, beautiful photograph of these snowy mountains. There's not a lot of text and graphics on here, but the graphics and text that they did decide to use are very effective, very simple, very clean, and it just gets people to get right to the buttons and go do what you need to do, or even get to this button at the bottom and help you scroll down through the rest of the website. Okay, here's another example of good button usage, real simple. A lot of good white space, right? Nice hierarchy, not super busy. We talked about style. Check out this nice line drawing cartoon style at the bottom. Make sure you clearly label all your buttons. Short phrases, right? We're not looking for sentences here. Just short phrases that everybody understands. Okay, now the next part of this I'm not going to go through. It is the vocabulary for website anatomy. Some of this you'll be familiar with, some of this you may not be, but definitely go through. Now I'm not giving you a vocabulary quiz, but I do need you to be familiar with this vocabulary because these are the words and phrases we are going to use in the class going forward. As we are critiquing each other's work and talking about our work, I would expect you to use this vocabulary, you know, like a professional. All right. So that is it for the anatomy of a website handout. You can read through the rest on your own. It is super useful, super fun, and it will give you the background you need. Now, in the meantime, of course, get those 2 deliverables in, right? Part 2 of the historical speculative paper, part 1 of the first deliverable, and then you've got homework to get working on. You're going to start working on part 3 of the speculative historical paper and deliverable 2 for project 1. But don't worry about those until the end of the week, until like Saturday or Sunday, because you're going to start working on those for next week, okay? All right, if you have any questions, thoughts, or concerns, be sure to email me or pop into my online office hours, which are posted in announcements. Don't forget to come see me. I would love to see you. All right, I will talk to you soon.